Okay. Hello there. I just saw Labyrinth. It stars David Bowie and Jennifer Connelly. It came out in 1986, and it's about a girl who basically goes into a labyrinth, and everyone in the labyrinth are basically Muppets from hell. That's it. That's the whole movie. Just Muppets from hell. Sesame Street on acid. It's as if some guy who wrote Sesame Street went and had a really horrible one-night stand, found out that he had HIV, knew he was going to die, and so he made this movie. So I've heard about Labyrinth since forever, pretty much. I was never exposed to it. I never knew what it was. My parents have never told me anything about Labyrinth. I don't know when the first time I may have heard of it was. Probably online somewhere. So I went into this movie knowing little to nothing. All I knew was that there was some girl and she needed to go into a labyrinth, and it was run by David Bowie. And that's it. That's all I knew. Nobody told me this movie is directed by Jim Henson. That's right. If his name sounds familiar, that is Jim Henson's Muppet Company. So, the creator of The Muppet Show. Now, there's going to be spoilers entirely throughout this review because I just don't care. If you're watching this, you've either seen Labyrinth and you want to see my thoughts on it, or you haven't seen Labyrinth and you don't care. So a real expansion of the story is that we have this girl named Sarah who is living somewhere in, suburbia, and she hates her life because she's got a stepmom who doesn't care about her, dad who really was kind of neglecting her a little bit, and she has this younger brother that is a stepbrother that she just can't stand. His name is Toby, and he's a little boy, and he's completely innocent and all of this, and I'm sure he'll never remember it when he gets older. He gets apparently all the love in the family. Now, we only have to assume all of this since we never see it. The weird thing about Sarah is she's played by Jennifer Connelly. Jennifer Connelly looks like this now. Yeah. So when you have a character who looks like this, and the stepmom makes a comment that, oh, yeah, I know you're not dating yet, love for you to be dating, you should go out and date people, you just don't buy it at all. Like, she's alone, reading fantasy books, she is very clearly 15 to 16 years old, and she doesn't have any friends, or a boyfriend, or nothing. She doesn't know anyone. There are no other characters. I'm sorry, she is a dog who she named Merlin. She is left at home one night to babysit her younger brother Toby while the parents go out on this date night. And of course she storms up to her room because life is just terrible and possibly be no place on earth worse than this home of hers, that it's nice and in suburbia and in an upper middle class family in these declining economic times of the 1980s. And basically she reads this book called The Labyrinth, which we really don't get to learn a lot of information about, so everything she says we kind of have to take for granted, like stuff about a goblin king and a ritual and how the goblins will take the boy and turn him into a goblin. Like there's some sort of a phrase she's supposed to say, and she's yelling at this boy like, oh, don't make me say it, you're not gonna make me say it, are you? And there's lightning going on outside, and it's really dramatic. And I remember I was watching the scene for the first time, and I think I was gonna get up to get a drink or something, and I paused it for the first time. The second I paused it, it changed to the first fantasy image we see in the film, which is a ton of goblins, I think in her closet. They're somewhere. They're just kind of listening, and it's just all their faces. And it looked horrifying, because I looked down to pause it, and I looked back up, and I'm like, oh jeez. So if this movie is for kids, I don't know what age range this movie is targeting, because clearly kids would have been freaked out by this. The age range is probably somewhere around 10 for boys. I don't know, is it boys or girls? I don't know. What is wrong with this movie? So we start to get this British dialogue by some of these goblins, which very, very quickly reminded me of Monty Python, which, fun fact, this movie is written by one of the former Python members, Terry Jones. So she makes this wish that her brother would be taken away by these goblins, and she closes the door and thinks everything's okay, but immediately thinks that she starts hearing things coming from the other room. And she goes back in, her brother is gone, and an owl flies into the window and turns into David Bowie, and I think that pretty much sets the tone for everything that's going to happen. Now, for the uninitiated, David Bowie is a British rock star. He's a very, very eccentric human being who's just really, really interesting. In the 80s, mullets were a thing. Also spandex, apparently, because I have now witnessed all the glory that is the Bowie bulge. This eccentric guy, who apparently is king of the goblins, starts playing with these little glass balls and explaining that, oh, I took the boy. Once a thing is said, it's too late. Wait a second. How does she know that David Bowie is the Goblin King? He doesn't even introduce himself. She just knows who it is. How does she know what he looks like? He's human. He's not a goblin. How does she know that he's the king of the goblins? He was just turned from an owl into a person. And a couple series of shots that make no sense at all. The Goblin King introduces her to his land, which has no name, where there's a labyrinth, and there's a castle in the middle of it, and he shows her his land, and he's like, hey, if you can get through the labyrinth in 13 hours, you get your brother back. If you don't, then he's mine, and he turns into a goblin forever. The fact that she is not questioning how she got to this amazing magical land of the labyrinth, or why the book she's reading is now somehow real, is never explained. And over the span of the film, we get Jennifer Connelly basically going through this labyrinth, finding worms and weird forests where there are people who throw their heads around while singing to some song that is terrifying. A dwarf named Hoggle, who she meets when he's peeing into a pool. Oh, labyrinth. There's this other guy whose name I can't remember, who's British, who is anthropomorphic, and he's a dog, and he rides on top of a normal, non-anthropomorphic dog. He was hilarious. I really liked him. As soon as he showed up, I thought he was funny, and I liked everything he did. Very much reminded me of classic Monty Python. There's this other snuffleupagus-looking thing that just kind of screams and rocks come out of nowhere, and I thought that was really awesome. They try and include as many things as they can in the labyrinth. There's a swamp, there's a forest, there's a town, there's a castle. They go as big as they can. There's stone walls, and then there's also walls made out of ivy, and they really do try to make it different and make it like a labyrinth where everything is changing. She tries to draw arrows on the floor, and little creatures will pop up and turn the thing over and have the arrow pointing the other way. I'm trying to give this movie credit for something, guys. The movie tries to do some character development with Sarah's character, which is the only part of this movie where I'm like, wow, that's actually going kind of deep, which is the idea that at the beginning of the film we see like her bedroom and it's full of all these stuffed animals and she just loves them, including a teddy bear she calls Lancelot. And she doesn't accept Toby, her younger brother, into her life. She cares about all her material items. And then later on, while you're going through the labyrinth, very much like Wizard of Oz, you keep seeing these items kind of constantly show up really, really subtly. But she starts to realize all this is just stuff. It's just junk. It doesn't mean anything. They're just material items. And it's supposed to be like a passing of innocence, like she's letting go of her childhood. In fact, this whole movie is supposed to be her letting go of her childhood and becoming mature, becoming a teenager, moving on. And if that tied in with some boy that she liked or some friends at school, I probably would buy that a little better. But because there's nothing outside in the real world except that the movie's just telling us that she's growing up, it's really hard for me to get behind that. Eventually, when they get through the labyrinth, they get to the Goblin Town, and that sequence is actually really impressive. There's this big battle scene, which is done with Muppets, so it's not really that intense, but there are houses getting torn down, there's machine guns firing out of slots, just big explosions going off, rocks rolling everywhere. It was a really long scene, and I was just actually enjoying it. That was one of the few times where I was entertained and having fun. And then, of course, we get to the end of the film, and she's got to save her brother, and there's this big Escher staircase, or whatever. It was cool. It was a cool finale. One thing I forgot to mention is this entire movie is scored to, like, this really abundantly 80s soundtrack. So just imagine somebody ripped the soundtrack of Beverly Hills Cop and put it over this movie, this fantasy film, with all these Jim Henson Muppets, and just imagine that. It's weird. It's so weird. So I know the review is kind of all over the place, but that's mainly because this movie is all over the place. Is it a mess? I wouldn't say that, because the movie knows exactly what it's doing. It's just kind of weird. It's such an odd experience. I wouldn't even say it's a bad movie. It's just so weird. If you're going into this looking for like a perfect Disney-like fantasy adventure, you're gonna be so disappointed. Also, if you're going into it looking for some sort of a dark, gothic, Guillermo del Toro, fantasy flick, That's Pan's Labyrinth. You have the wrong movie. So I didn't hate Labyrinth. I thought it was a weird, strange experience that I'm never going to forget, ever. I won't, seriously. I can't. Would I watch it again? Probably. I'd love to make more sense of it. I'd love to understand what, was happening. At the end of the day, I'm gonna give Labyrinth a 4 out of 10. I don't really understand a lot of the things it was going for, and I think it was just so strange and odd for a kid's film. Thanks for watching, and if you like this video, you can hit the yellow subscribe button up above so that you can, get more of these when they come out, or just hit the links below to check out the ones that I've made already. And as always, I hope you had a great day, and have a spectacular tomorrow. Okay, to take things a little bit more seriously, this movie was still really messed up. I don't know why this movie exists. I don't know what is going on. These sets are pretty big and they're practical. They're practical sets. The whole movie is practical sex. Like the Bowie bulge. The Bowie bulge is practical sex. This is the first review I'm gonna have a blooper reel for.